Good morning.
Good morning.
Don't think that it's fanciful, imaginary, or that it's beyond the possibility of man on earth to live by the activity of the Christ, because living by the activity of the Christ is the normal and natural way to live. Living the human way is the unnatural way. It's been brought about, well, it's called in religious language, by man's disobedience, or man's falling away from grace. That's why he has to live by the sweat of his brow. That's why women have to bring forth children in pain and traveling. Actually, there should be no pain at all about childbirth. There wouldn't be at all under the activity of the Christ. As a matter of fact, there isn't. Whenever there is a practitioner of spiritual capacity in attendance at a childbirth that is a painless one, I doubt that I have ever seen it fail, that childbirth is entirely painless. When there is, I don't mean by that anybody who calls himself a practitioner can do it any more than anyone who calls himself a practitioner can heal. Getting a degree as a practitioner isn't what I mean. But attaining a measure of the Christ, then childbirth becomes normal, painless, and but that is only one evidence of what I mean. Actually, we are not meant to live by taking thought. We are not meant to live by worry, concern, fear, doubt. We are not meant to live by the grace of any man whose breath is in his nostril. We are not meant to be dependent on husbands or wives or estates. We are not meant to be concerned for anything except showing forth God's glory. Every act of our lives should show forth the fact that God is functioning in our lives. Now, there are periods in your experience when you know right well that you have shown forth an activity of the Christ. In other words, you've had the healing of a headache or the healing of a throat ache or a foot ache, and you've known definitely that that wasn't brought about by a human means or by waiting for a human healing time. It was stopped in its tracks right where it was. Or it may be that some other experience of relationships or supply were met so drastically that you knew without a question of a doubt that the activity of the Christ had produced it, and that nothing of a human nature had brought it about. But you see, that is only living between visitations of the Christ, or from one visitation to another. Whereas the Christ is a spiritual presence and a spiritual power. It's an invisibility, but nevertheless real, which takes over the functions of our life. It takes over the functions of the body, so that you don't have to take thought for walking or talking or remembering or digestive or eliminative action. You don't have to take any thought about that or help it in any way, because this activity of the Christ, of the Spirit within, functions it. And so you go through your days and nights of bodily activity without even being aware of the fact that you have a body. That is when I live, yet not I, Christ liveth my life. If I have to take thought for getting my blood to circulate, or my digestive organs to work, or eliminative organs, or muscles, then I'm living by bread alone, not by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. But when the body is functioning without my taking any thought about it, and without even knowing whether I have a blood system or a digestive system or a eliminative system, then of course it is the direct evidence of Christ in action. So it is with every phase of our human experience. If we awaken in the morning and the right things are said at the right time and the right acts are done at the right time, and the right people come into our experience at the right time, and the wrong people are eliminated from our experience at the right time, then we say, yes, I see that every phase of my experience is a direct result of the activity of the Christ. I'm really not doing this. I'm not taking thought about it. It is doing it before I have any awareness of it. It is the activity of the body. It is the activity of the purse. It is the activity of our relationships with each other. The presence goes before us to make the crooked places straight. The presence goes before us to prepare a place for us. Everything is done for us, and you remember a couple of years ago, Saroyan wrote that he is convinced that God lives our lives and that we just go along for the ride. And at a certain state of unfoldment, that is exactly true. We are just on this plane as witnesses, as much so as we witness the coconuts growing on those trees out there, or witness the roses coming out into bloom, or witness that grass growing after it's been cut. We don't do anything about it. We witness it. Yes, we may be prompted to water it a little more or give it a fertilizer, but even we don't do that. We're prompted to do that. We are prompted. We just go along and do those things that are given us to do. He performeth that which is given me to do. He tells me, then I have a feeling I ought to water the lawn. I have a feeling I ought to order fertilizer. I have a feeling I ought to go to town today and take care of certain things that have been hanging fire for weeks. Yet never before did I have an urge to do it. I have things lying on the desk there, days and weeks, and pick them up and can do nothing about them. Lay them down again, and then one day it says now, and then it's done in that minute. And then I find that everything has worked together toward that minute, and in a jiffy it is complete. What I'm trying to say, I'm saying it very imperfectly, but what I'm trying to say is this, that from this day forward, be more of a beholder, be more of a witness, do less yourself and watch more being done by the activity. See if you can't yourself detect things taking place in your life that you can say, that I know was an activity of the Christ because I had nothing to do with it. I never thought about that. I didn't dream of such a thing coming into my experience. Yes, that was an activity of some invisible presence and power that was operating in my behalf. You also find in the experience of those around you, and this is more especially true of children and those who are still innocent in thought, innocent of the world's ways, that you do things for them that you yourself hadn't planned to do or expected to do, and you don't realize that you are responding to the Christ that's governing their lives. They have a Christ that is functioning and using you for their benefit, just like this dog has a Christ, and it uses us to pet it or to feed it or to house it and to supply its needs. It's only because it has an invisible, protective, maintaining, sustaining influence, and we are being used. Same as in the case of children. They have that inner something that even without their knowing anything about the cost of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, seems to provide it for them, or clothing, or entertainment, amusement. And they have no sense of values, or how much money is involved, or how hard it was to get. They just want it, and it's there. And you find that you even inconvenienced yourself, or did without, that they might have it, not realizing that you were being an instrument of the Christ which was operating in them, through them, and for them. And so it is. Christ is God itself in its individual expression in our lives. Just as that sunlight out there is the whole sun itself, but yet it's centered or individualized in this particular area. 1,000 miles from now, that same sun is shining, yet in an individual, we would call it sunbeam or sunbeams, but it is the sun itself. So it is. God is the Christ. God constitutes the Christ. God is the universal, infinite allness, expressing itself individually as your consciousness and mine, in proportion as we relax from taking conscious thought. The moment we outline or plan or take the responsibility for ourselves, then we shut off the activity of the Christ. On the other hand, when we refrain from taking thought or making a move, we make way for the Christ to act. Then we carry out on the human plane whatever the direction is that has been given to us. In other words, we could say to ourselves, all right, I will do today whatever prompting comes to me each hour to do. Probably when I leave here, the next thought will be for lunch. Well, then lunch, let it be. But on the other hand, it may well be that with very intense thoughts about lunch, another call will come and lunch has to be postponed, which it wouldn't be if you permitted that word I to be so intense that nothing is going to thwart your having that lunch. But if you realize always that you're subject to the powers that be, to the Christ, it may well be that some incident will arise that will prevent what you had in mind. Then you'll do the next thing. And so each step of the way, we wait, and the Christ functions, and then we carry out what is given us to do. But somehow it says that as of today, the activity of the Christ will be more in evidence than it has been heretofore. Again, you see, we are back at that old business of talking about the Christ and what its function is and how wonderful it is when it operates, but it isn't operating. But here we have a promise that as of today, the activity of the Christ will be more evident in our experience than it has ever been before. This means that we must be more than ever alert. Whenever we're doing anything, to ask, am I doing this or is the Christ doing this? And if you can't feel that the Christ is doing it, stop. Stop. Just as in the human world of today, very few people can be alone or be silent or be still. The mode of life is such that the human mind now has to be distracted continuously by outside noises, whether it's movies or television or planes overhead or trains rolling by or a bridge game or solitaire. Something has to be going on in the external realm to keep it occupied, otherwise it gets upset. And that is because it cannot stand the silence, the quietness, or inner peace. That is why there are so few able to grasp a spiritual message. More could grasp it if it were an activity of either body or mind. That is why in church organization it is always easy to have a crowd if you just have asked for enough ushers or ask for enough people to hand out programs or ask for enough to take up the collection, because everybody wants to be busy. Nobody wants to sit down in church and get quiet and listen to God because they haven't the faculty for it. Now, as long as that feverish activity of the human mind is taking place, the Christ is not able to break through and reveal itself. We are a nation of go-getters, and so we do not know that the best way to be the best go-getter is to have these long and frequent periods of quiet, of do nothing and get nothing, but receive the inspiration that makes it possible to accomplish more in 1 hour than the human mind and body can accomplish in 24 hours. The person that has the knack of resting, of being mentally quiet, accomplishes more in less time. But the person who goes the next step higher and is enabled to open themselves to the activity of the Christ is, of course, without limit. There is a limit to what the human mind and body can perform in 24 hours. But there is no limit to what the Christ can perform through a human being in 24 hours. There is absolutely no limit. Recently, a girl in college who was so busy with many college activities that when she came to her examinations was afraid that she wouldn't have passing grades, wrote for help. And then came a letter saying that she passed with perfect grades. Perfect grades, not passing grades. Perfect grades. She completed every one of the studies of the course with perfect grades. Not some of them, all of them. That is not possible to a human being. That isn't possible to the activity of the Christ, because it takes no thought for what your capacity is. It operates through its capacity, for which we are but instruments. That is, you can visualize that if you can go back now to the Temple Gate Beautiful and see Peter and John raise this crippled man from the Temple Gate. you can see definitely that neither Peter nor John could do any such thing. And so you must see that there must have been an activity beyond their human understanding, beyond their capacity, and they acknowledged it. They acknowledged it. Why marvel, ye men of Israel? As if we of our own understanding or powers had done this thing. Just think of that. As if we of our own understanding. So it is, as you engage in healing work, and somebody tries to tell you what a wonderful understanding you have, you will also feel a little bit ridiculous. You know, it's like having the Medal of Honor pinned on you when you weren't even there. Because you realize, and you realize it with the healing of a simple headache, or you realize it if you have the good pleasure to witness the healing of a cancer or consumption or polio or paralysis, you will know definitely that it's not false modesty that makes a person say, but it wasn't my understanding or my power. And it wasn't. On the other hand, let us not get away from the fact that if they hadn't attained that degree of humility, that which did it would not have done it. Don't ever forget that the impotent man or paralyzed man at the Temple Gate Beautiful would still be sitting there if there hadn't been a Peter and a Paul, a Peter and a John, of sufficient degree of selflessness to permit the activity of the Christ to function. And so it would be that Jairus' daughter and Peter's mother-in-law and Lazarus would all still be where they were if there hadn't been an individual of a sufficient degree of nothingness to permit the infinity to appear. And that is the secret of this work. By now you should be knowing, you really should have a complete realization, complete, that the activity of the human mind is not prayer. By now you should really and truly know that thinking thoughts, affirming affirmations, and denying denials, and giving treatments, and all the rest of this human mind paraphernalia isn't really spiritual healing. As a matter of fact, it isn't even prayer. By now it must have made itself very clear to you that the world has been praying for thousands of years. And all you have to do is go into a Hebrew synagogue just one Friday night and listen to their prayers. Then go into an Episcopal church on a Sunday and listen to their prayers, made up on books, rote ritual, vain repetitions. Go through all of the repetitions of names or the repetitions of beads, whether it's in the Catholic Church or Muslim Church, and see how every bit of it takes place up here in the mind. Whether you are repeating the affirmations of unity or whether you are declaring the scientific statement of being a Christian Science, see if it isn't all taking place in your mind. And then you will know why lightning only strikes once in 100 times and brings about the harmony that is being sought. The prayer of the human mind is not a prayer at all, no matter how beautiful the words. For instance, in the Letters of a Scattered Brotherhood, I'm sure most of you have read that. If you haven't, go to the public library and read at least part of it. And note the beauty of the passages in that book, the beauty of the prayers, meditations that came through. And then remember this, that as they came through, the one who received them It was the Word of God that was sufficient to change a whole world. But that as you read it, it is only a collection of beautiful passages. If you expect it to do anything for you except give you a sense of beauty and calm and peace, you'll be mistaken. Because it's no longer prayer when you read it or memorize it or recite it. It was prayer when it came through the individual who wrote it down. I like to pick up that book every once in a while and read, just for the joy and inspiration that flows through some of its passages. You can almost feel it as the words were given to the one who brought them into written expression. And there's a thrill in them, and there's a joy, and there's an elevation of consciousness. But so far as we are concerned, the only value of that book is to point out that the same thing can happen to us. If we can rest back in that same peace and quietness. Because the voice of God is very much like a 24-hour-a-day radio station. The voice of God is speaking 24 hours a day. It doesn't speak when you need to hear it. It is speaking since the beginning of time. But there is a period in which you tune into it and become aware of it. That doesn't mean that you couldn't have done it last year or 10 years ago. You could. It was speaking. It was announcing itself in human consciousness. It was revealing itself somewhere on earth. Some were hearing it while we were busy knitting booties for the grandchild. Don't let us be so busy knitting that we are not tuning in. But you see, tuning in is not an activity of the human mind. Yes, there may be an activity in preparation that you'll find now in the writings under contemplation, meditation. But don't be fooled into believing that that is it. That isn't it. The it is Christ. And Christ only announces itself when we are silent. You see a strange thing this morning. As I sat back to meditate, and everything extraneous dropped away from me, I was just inside a vacuum, and then all of a sudden whatever this is that's coming out came. But you see, it could announce itself, not I. It could announce itself and say what was taking place, is about to take place. There is an it, and you have to set up the vacuum that makes it possible for it not only to announce itself, but to function itself as your individual experience. Now, it is the nearly 2 months of our daily work which has led us by degrees to this place. Well, behind this 2 months, remember, were the years that were preparing us for these 2 months. Just as these 2 months have been a preparation for what will happen the balance of this year and next. Nobody could participate in the work that we have done in this past 2 months without something of a radical spiritual nature taking place in them in the next 2 months or 2 years. Any more than you could plant your seeds of grass and fertilizer and water it and then not eventually see a crop of grass. It has to follow. There may appear to be an interval in between your planting the seed and your fertilizing and your watering before you begin to see the result. But the result is inevitable. In fact, it was inevitable from the moment you planted the seed. So it is here. From the moment that you turned to an invisible, a humanly unknown way of life, humanly unknown presence and power of direction, from that moment, regardless of how many years ago it was, and no matter how many steps you have taken in between, some of them right and some of them wrong steps, no matter how many there may have been, it was inevitable with that first turning that eventually you would come to that place in consciousness where the Christ would take over, because that was the purpose of turning. The moment you turned away from material persons, material help, material avenues, to the spiritual, from that moment on it was inevitable that the spiritual would take over. The length of time in between would represent the mess and mass of humanhood that had to be cleansed out of our temple. Our temples have become slightly soiled with human experience, and slightly is an understatement. And even the Christ itself seems to require a little time to purify us, to get this temple, this consciousness, ready for the conception and birth of the babe. Strange. It's nothingness, you see. It's nothingness of human thought, nothingness of human self, nothingness of human being, and instantly it's allness of its being. First there's that sense of nothingness. Nothing that I do, nothing that I think helps, nothing that I do helps, nothing that I try to do comes out right. Always comes that nothingness of human action, of human wisdom, of human planning, of human saving, of human everything. And with that nothingness, when it reaches completeness, comes the allness and that which has been so evident. See it here? That's where it is this morning. That's allness. That's its activity. That's back to the Master. Oh, we have it in deep silence. My peace I give you. That's spiritual peace. My presence will never leave you nor forsake you. Right there is that me, that mine, that my, that I, which is transcendental in nature, because it is not a human you or me. It is a still small voice whispering, bearing witness to a presence that we will never see face to face and live. We will never see face to face and live as a human being. But we will go on living here and now on earth as spiritual beings. When this moment comes, as this moment comes, it's coming. It's coming more and more, it says so, into this experience, your experience. As it does, always remember not to make of yourselves peculiar people for the outside world. Be normal, be natural, speak the language of the world, be in the world, but not of it. Don't wear your heart on your sleeve. Don't go around telling the world that there is an invisible presence and an invisible power, because it'll lock you up. Don't tell the world about not taking thought for your life, because it'll become afraid of you. But wherever there is a receptive thought, wherever someone comes to you in recognition of what you have, then you can be free in sharing it. But otherwise, be a man or woman in the outside world, but be a saint inside. Live outwardly the same as everybody else does, but inwardly have your spiritual standards that you're conforming to. See, it's appearing, and it's taking over. You cannot localize the Christ and say that it is low here or low there, because it isn't. But sometimes you will feel as if it was sitting right in back of your heart, or probably sitting on top of your heart. Very often that's the way it is. Or, as this morning, it may sit up on your shoulder, right under the skin. You'd be surprised how much of a very living presence it is, as if it were an actual physical being. It isn't, and localizing it is really foolishness, because the kingdom of God is neither low here nor low there. It isn't any place. It's within you, wherever that may be. And but it appears sometimes to be sitting right there on the top of the heart, or in back of the heart, or up on the shoulder, but it makes no difference. Maybe one place today and another tomorrow. Don't put any stock or value upon that. Just rejoice if you happen to feel it here, there, or the other place. But don't expect it to be there all the time, or you'll be disappointed. That would be localizing it. The same with statements of the Christ. If you have a very beautiful statement of the Christ come to you today, don't look for it tomorrow. Don't be concerned if it doesn't come, because it may come in words today, and it may come in thoughts tomorrow. It may come in quotation the next day, and it may just come in an impulse, and then it may seem to be absent for a long while. And then it may come again, in one way or another. But don't try to capture it. Don't try to hold on to it. Don't try to localize it. Don't try to say, oh, this is it. No, this is only it this minute. What it'll be an hour from now is something entirely different. And if it leaves you with the blues or depressed the next day, don't be concerned about that either. In this life, it is all hills and valleys, all mountains and valleys. Sometimes you're on a nice hill and you slide down into a valley, but there are other days you're way up on a mountaintop, much higher than Mount Whitney. But I have known that to follow just the day after by being lower than hell itself. Don't be concerned about that. That has nothing to do with you. That has only to do with these unfolding degrees of consciousness and the human response to them. They have no particular significance, except that sometime if you find yourself with a period of being down or blue or under, rejoice in that. Rejoice if you have longer periods, because those are the preparations for the mountain experiences. You cannot go up until you have first gone down. In other words, no man can find his life until he loses it. And in experiencing the Christ, it always comes after a period of death of some of our humanness. There always comes some degree of sloughing off of our human self, our human selfishness or desires or wants or wishes. And then as that sloughs off, then we rise up into the higher thing. But nobody has ever risen so high that they stayed there until the moment of ascension. And the ascension does not come while there is a trace of humanness left in us. And you might say, how can I tell when all sense of humanness has left me? Well, there's one way you can tell that never fails. Do you care whether you're alive or dead? If you do, there's still a trace of humanness. Because as soon as humanness has left, it makes no difference to anyone whether they're here or there, or whether they're here or hereafter, whether they're functioning on this plane or the next. Why? Because there's no more I left. That's the secret. There's no more I left. You see, it's only I who want to live, or I who sometimes may want to die. It's only I who can be prosperous, or it's only I who can lack. But supposing there were no I, then there'd be neither prosperity nor lack. There'd be neither life nor death. There'd be neither sickness nor health. There would only be a state of Christhood. And so you see, as long as there's a trace of I, there's humanness. As long as there's humanness, there'll be periods of human indulgence, which will bring our periods of downness, and there'll be periods of being lifted up in some measure of the Christ. That'll bring our periods of upness. And so it'll be up and down, back and forth. But the periods of up will be longer, the periods of down will be shorter. The periods of grace will be greater, the periods of problems will be lesser, and that will continue year after year, year after year, until a point of transition. Actually, this has been happening to you from the first moment that you turned to the spiritual path. You have had your moments of ups and your longer moments of down, but as the years have gone on, you're having longer periods of up and shorter periods of down, greater periods of health and harmony, lesser periods of discord, sin, fear. And so it goes. That's the way the balance goes until that day of transition. Now, today is one of the days of transition on your path. Even though you will still have human experiences and you will also have more spiritual experiences, nevertheless, I am sure that if you write the date down, you will tell me a year from now that never again has human experience been quite so important or severe that actually you made a transit out of a phase of life. In other words, the human sense of life did not touch you so deeply. It won't after today. The human sense of life will not touch you so deeply. There will still be experiences, but you will never be able to hate as intently. You won't be able to love as intently either, humanly. And you won't be able to grieve as intently, but you won't be able to rejoice as intently either. That also levels off. Because when spiritual awareness comes, there is no such thing as grief or joy. There is no such thing as lack or prosperity. There's no such thing. There's just each day coming and each day's needs being met. Sometimes there's more left over and sometimes less, but that doesn't concern you because of the knowledge of the fresh manna every day. It will reveal itself to you that if you were called upon in the light of what you've studied in the last 2 months, if you were called upon for a treatment right now to help someone, that you would not depend on anything you know, anything you've read in books, not even in my books, but that you would just close your eyes and turn to the Father and expect the Father to give you a new treatment, a new light, a new word for this specific event. I doubt that anyone who has been through this 2 months will ever try to search around in their memory for a truth. I doubt that they will ever again try to remember something that they learned. No, if this 2 months has done nothing more than to show us that whenever we are presented with an appearance, we are to turn to the Father within and let the Father give us a new answer, certainly it must have done that for us, if nothing else. Well, once you perceive that point, that God is sufficient unto every case that comes to you, that God is sufficient unto every experience to give you fresh truth, new light, new spiritual unfoldment, you will very quickly thereafter perceive that God is able to give you new dollars every day of the week, new business, new thoughts for books or pictures or plays. In other words, that every single moment of your day is a new opportunity for receiving the inflow of the Spirit. But who is to say that that shouldn't flow as loaves and fishes or cruises of oil or gold or greenbacks? Do you see what I mean? You will soon begin to see that you cannot limit God to the form in which God appears. And so you will see that if God can give you new inspiration for every treatment that you're called upon to give, so God can give you new dollar bills for every bill which you're called upon to pay. Do you see that? Yet you're not turning to God for material things. You're turning to God for God. But you'll understand that it will appear as the form necessary in the moment, whether that form is a new treatment or a new dollar bill or a seat on an airplane or a reservation in a hotel where there aren't any. Do you see that? In other words, God appears as every experience. All right. The reason that the burden of human existence will never again be as deep to you after today is that heretofore a sense of I has come to you with how will I meet this, or how shall I meet this, or how should I meet this. But from henceforth you will remember that I am with you to meet it, that I will never leave you nor forsake you, that there is this thing that has happened today, this Christ realization which has taken place, which will do the doing, which will know the knowing, which will act the acting, which will maintain the maintaining. In other words, there will be a greater sense of an invisible presence and power to perform that which is given us to do. And it is for that reason that the burdens will seem less. The burdens only seem great when I have to move them or carry them. The burden is never so great when we know that there is a shoulder to carry it. He says something about my burden is light, my yoke. Do you see? Yes, you can rest it on my shoulder, and it's no weight on the Christ shoulder at all. It doesn't burden the Christ one bit. And so as this Christ more and more and more manifests itself, makes itself evident in your experience, there will be less of I carrying a burden or having to salve a burden, and more of I, my presence, being there to perform it. You see, again, throughout this 2 months it has been made clear to us that whereas before we have studied this and read about it and prayed about it, that now it is to be an experience. So it will be. You will find you have much less to say to anybody about after you have the actual experience itself. You may have volumes to say in teaching, but to yourself inwardly you'd say, isn't that all a waste of time? When the experience itself would only take 1 second, if we could evolve some way to give our students this experience in 1 second. We can, in 1 second, after the years that have gone before. But the years must have gone before the sincerity, the integrity, in some measure having left all for Christ, in some measure having forsaken mother, brother, sister, and father for my sake. You see, the Christ does not come to those who have not yet learned its value, its presence, its power, its jurisdiction. It has not yet come to those who have not left the other things for it that took its place. Personal wisdom, personal power, personal knowledge, personal strength. It is only in the sacrifice of I-ness that the I am-ness is evident. You'll see now what I meant when I said that the day will come when we will heal only with a smile. That smile always comes in the realization of, here it is. There's no burden. This is here. The assurance is there. Words do not convey the thought of the meaning or the activity of the presence of the Christ, but a smile can. A smile can. A person can just look at another person, and the look in the eye is almost like saying, I'm a Mason too. It means we belong to the same order. We've seen the same invisible something, the same spiritual something. And that speaks more volumes than all the books that have ever been written on the subject of religion. Let's meditate. This is what it says. Repeat that you must watch carefully that you do not have faith in these thoughts that you think when in prayer or meditation or communion. For instance, someone says or writes for help, and then they'll say, and I'm realizing that it is already done. Well, you know, they could just well left that off. They're realizing that it's already done is meaningless. If they really realized that it was already done, they tear up the letter and say, well, what's the use sending a letter then if it's already done? Well, that was just a metaphysical cliche. That was just a platitude. Someone else writes, well, I know that having written it to you, that you'll take care of it and that'll be the end of it. Oh, nonsense. Nonsense. Nobody should write anything like that at all. Because there's no use of believing that because they've written it to me that it's all taken care of. I'm not the deciding factor in it. And the chances are that what they meant is that it's going to come out the way they expect it to come out. And it may not be that way at all. Be watchful that you don't indulge those things. Get out of the habit of making metaphysical statements. Get more into the habit of letting God make statements to you. Then you've got something to bank on. Then you've got something to have assurance in. It may take a little while, and at this point your meditations may be a little longer, because now you won't want to give them up until you've actually felt that presence, even if you have to sit there for quite a bit longer. You will want to know that you've reached the center of your being and have that inner assurance, because with that assurance you can be assured it's all done. But with these statements that come through the mind, that isn't so. And it is for that reason that the more and more of these affirmations that I read in literature, really the more chills go down my spine, because I know that people are depending on them. And there is no dependence to be placed in them at all. God's grace is not a thing of the human mind. God's grace is not your thinking, because your thoughts are not God's thoughts. God's grace is dependent on God's thoughts as they appear in you, not as you think them, as you receive them. Now, all of this means that we have a faculty of awareness that's greater than the mind. But it's not developed. It is like a musician who has all of the faculties of musicianship but hasn't the training, hasn't the experience, hasn't the practice. They have all the potentialities. So it is with us. We have the grace of God, and we have the faculty through which we can receive the grace of God, but we have depended on physical might and mental power. And yet Scripture says, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, God's Spirit. And here we turn around and try to use our physical strength or our mental powers of memory or recitation or affirmation or denial, whereas it is not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit. They have the arm of flesh. They have all the physical powers and all the mental powers. But we have the Lord God Almighty. Have we? No, we haven't. Not as long as we're declaring it. We only have it when we stop declaring it, get silent, receptive, and responsive, and it says, I am in the midst of you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Whithersoever thou goest, I will go. Then you will know within yourself that you will never again be alone. You will never again die. You will never again fear. You may go through troublous waters. You may go through the valley of the shadow of death. That is all part of this human mesmeric experience. But that will not concern you. You will be able to rest at the center of your being while the storms pass over your head. You will be able to sit back, if necessary, go to bed if you're ill, and lie there and just wait and see that this too will pass. Oh yes, there are times when you will go through the valley of the shadow of death, or when problems will be set, there will be storms at sea. That's all part of mesmeric sense. But your part will be to retire, not to fight, not to battle, not to argue, not to mentalize, but to retire into the center of your being and there wait patiently until the assurance of my presence comes. Then you'll find that it won't be 4 months to the harvest, it won't be 4 months to your recovery. Then you'll jump out of bed in 1 second and be about your Father's business, or so forth and so forth and so on. Thank you.